An officer takes the stand and says there's blood mixed with moisture on Libby German's skin. Then comes the devastating detail. That moisture is Libby's own tears. Her best friend Abby Williams dies next to her. Both girls' throats are cut. If you've been following the Delphi murders case, you know just how haunting it is. But details like those didn't come out until the trial. A trial that ends with Richard Allen guilty on all counts. Today, we're breaking down what the jury heard. Let's recap. February 13th, 2017, Libby German, just 14, and her best friend Abby Williams, 13, are walking along a hiking trail in the small town of Delphi, Indiana, where their lives are brutally cut short. Their bodies are found the next day in the woods, along with a bombshell clue. Libby recorded this video of the killer. 5 years later, police ID him as this man, 52-year-old Richard Allen. He lives in Delphi and works at the local CVS. 2 years after that, he's found guilty of the double murder. So, what made the jury convict him? Well, for starters, he confessed 61 times, with details only the killer would know. Thanks to the missing pieces Richard himself filled in, here's what prosecutors believe happened that day. Richard Allen visits his parents that morning, but opts not to go to lunch with his mom. Instead, he drinks 3 beers, then goes to the trails. He has a gun and a box cutter with him. During his walk, he spots Abby and Libby and decides to rape them. He follows them to the bridge and corners them. When he's getting close, Libby secretly records him, but there's more to that recording than you saw. Let's watch the public version one more time. That's a quick clip, only a few seconds, right? But the jury hears a longer 43-second clip. In it, it sounds like Abby says, "Is he right here? Don't leave me up here." Then Libby, "This is the path. That be a gun. There's no path here." Bridge guy says, "Guys." The girls say, "Hi." He says, "Down the hill." The police release the part with just his voice overlaid on the video of him walking, hoping someone will recognize him. But Richard gets lucky and stays off their radar for the next 5 years. During that time, he goes about his normal life working at CVS and living with his wife and daughter in a house that's only about 5 minutes from the trails. But he's got a big secret about what he did on February 13th. 2017. The logistics here are important, so let me just give you a brief overview. The Monon High Bridge meets the main trail on one side. On the other side, you run into a red barricade that marks the edge of a private property. Overgrown terrain, trees, and a steep hill go down the banks of Deer Creek. There's really only one way on and off: the side of the bridge that meets the main trail. At 2:09 p.m., Libby Snapchats a photo from the far side, looking back at Abby crossing the bridge toward her. The idea is they'll walk back across the bridge to the trails to meet Libby's dad for their ride home. But before they can cross back over, Richard Allen, aka the bridge guy, crosses the bridge behind Abby and corners them on the far side. At 2:13 p.m., Libby secretly records him coming toward them. When he gets closer, she sees his gun. She mentions it on the longer audio recording the jury hears. His plan is to rape them, but before he can do anything, a van drives by. It's the homeowner who lives on that private property coming home from work. This is one of those details only the killer knows. He's startled by the van, so he forces the girls farther down the hill and across Deer Creek. Some of their clothes are found inside out in the water. It's 50 to 60 feet up the steep bank into the thick forest and rough, muddy terrain where the girls are killed. At 2:32 p.m., Libby's phone stops moving for good. He doesn't sexually assault them as far as the medical examiner can tell. There's no DNA on or in their bodies and no signs of that type of assault. He uses a box cutter to cut Abby's throat once through her jugular. Libby gets 4, maybe 5 overlapping cuts across her neck, spattering the tree she's pressed against. Both of her hands are bloody, so she probably grabs her own throat at some point. He uses her left arm to drag her to the spot where she'll be found the next day, naked, on her back with her left arm still stretched above her head, touching the base of a tree. Her right arm is down at her side. He lays a large tree branch on her left shoulder, another one across her neck. Two smaller branches form a V where her legs join her body. Abby's about 3 feet away, fully dressed, including her shoes. She's also wearing Libby's sweatshirt and jeans, and the clothes are still damp from the creek. She's on her back with her right knee bent and her right foot under her left leg. Her elbows are bent and close to her body. He lays 3 branches on top of her in the shape of an asterisk. He waves the gun around to force them to do what he wants, racking it at least once while he's in the woods with them. Police find an unfired .40 caliber cartridge between the bodies. Now, if you have a loaded weapon with a bullet in the chamber and you rack the slide, the bullet ejects without being fired. Unfortunately for Richard, guns leave unique marks on their bullets. It's the only clue he leaves at the scene. Other than that, there's no DNA or any other forensic evidence pointing back to him. He'll throw the box cutter away later in the dumpster behind CVS. Afterward, he walks back to his car all bloody and muddy. At least one woman sees him moving toward the building where he backed his car in so close his license plate isn't easy to see. Then he drives the 2.5 miles home, cleans up, and goes on with life as usual. He's the kind of killer you don't expect. He's the local at the bar smiling next to the police sketch of the killer. The friendly guy behind the counter at CVS who doesn't charge Libby and Abby's families to develop the pictures they want to use for the girl's memorial. He's the doting father who takes pictures of his daughter posing on the high bridge after he kidnapped 2 teenage girls from the same spot. A few days after Libby and Abby's bodies are found, Richard Allen self-reports he was on the trail that day between 1:30 and 3:30. He says he was taking a walk, looking at stocks on his phone. He describes what he was wearing: a blue jacket, jeans, and a hat. He puts himself on the Monon High Bridge. He claims he was looking at the fish and never saw Abby and Libby, but his statement isn't filed correctly and no one follows up. The big break in the case comes in 2022 when a volunteer secretary in the sheriff's department finds his statement and puts his name in front of investigators again. When police talk to him, he tells them he didn't do anything to the girls and the cartridge can't be from his gun because he didn't bring it with him that day on the trail. They bring Richard's wife in and she's surprised to hear he was on the bridge that day. Back then, he lied and told her he wasn't there. Do you think she saw the bridge guy video and thought he looked like her husband? When police search Richard's house, he says something strange. After they hand him some paperwork to file for damages, because the cops really tear up your house when they're looking for evidence in a double murder, he says, "It doesn't matter, it's over." But actually, the cops don't find any DNA linking him to Abby or Libby in his house or car. It's been 5 years, giving him plenty of time to clean up, but they do find plenty of knives, guns, and box cutters, and one of his guns matches the marks on the cartridge found at the crime scene. A lot of people consider it ironclad evidence. Those marks are like fingerprints, but others call it junk science. Obviously, in this case, the jury believes the bullet came from Richard Allen's gun. And even if they didn't, they can't ignore how many times he said he killed the girls. After about 3 months in jail, he starts confessing. He tells guards, the warden, his wife, his mother, and his prison therapist that he killed Libby and Abby. He tells them he's the killer over the phone, in person, and in several notes. One note says, "I am ready to officially confess to killing Abby and Libby. I hope I get the opportunity to tell the families I'm sorry." Another one says, "God, I'm so glad no one gave up on me after I killed Abby and Libby." In a third note, he writes, "I, Richard Matthew Allen, killed Abby and Libby by myself. No one helped me." At the same time, Richard appears to fall apart mentally. He's kept in solitary on suicide watch. The lights are always on, and there's always a camera on him. If you were his defense lawyer, here's where it gets interesting. His prison psychologist is a true crime fan. She's very well versed on this case. If you were his lawyer, you might say she's in the ideal position to manipulate a disturbed prisoner into making false confessions. Especially when you consider Richard also confesses to molesting his sister and daughter, but at his trial, they both say he never touched them like that. The defense's case hangs on the theory that Richard is making false confessions because he has a dependent personality disorder. Now, what is that? The internet says it causes people to have an excessive need to be taken care of by others. They may also have trouble expressing disagreement with others and may agree to things they know are wrong to avoid losing support. as in agreeing to things like double murder. If you were on the prosecution side, you'd jump on the fact that no one knew the murder weapon was a box cutter, not even the cops. They knew it was a sharp-edged instrument, but it's Richard who says he threw a box cutter away in the dumpster. And it's Richard who says he was surprised by a van driving by. The appearance of the van matches the timing the homeowner gave the police earlier. If these are false confessions, he sure knows a lot. And then there's his voice. A prison official who listened to 700 of Richard's phone calls is positive that's him on Libby's recording, telling them to go down the hill. But as he waits for his trial in prison, Richard's really selling the idea that he's losing it and doesn't know what he's saying, except he just keeps saying it. A lot. In early April 2023, he calls his wife to say, "I did it. I killed Abby. I killed Abby and Libby." She says, "You're not feeling well. There's something wrong. Why would you say that?" By mid-April 2023, he won't wear his clothes. He lays in his own feces. He even eats it and decorates his cell with it. He washes his face in the toilet, eats his mail, and constantly bangs his head against the walls. This all coincides with his lawyers giving him some of the discovery materials from his case. Most of the guards and even his prison psychologists think the timing isn't a coincidence and Richard's faking it. But he doesn't stop confessing. He says it over and over. "I killed Abby and Libby." He says it to anyone who will listen. At one point, he wonders out loud why his wife and mother don't believe him. In one call, he says, "Mom, I wouldn't sit here and tell you I did it if I didn't." Despite all his confessions, he goes to trial pleading not guilty. Meanwhile, his defense team is pulling out all the stops to try and introduce reasonable doubt. They looked at the branches he laid on the girls and the blood stains on the trees and thought there might be a hint of symbolism there. Specifically, Odinism. That's a Norse pagan belief that some white supremacist groups have jumped on. So maybe some violent Odinism followers did it. The theory became known as the Odinism defense, but the judge didn't let them tell the jury about it. She also didn't let them introduce the police sketches into the trial. She decided they're not relevant because they weren't used to catch him. 3 weeks of testimony later, and a jury is left with the story you just heard. They deliberate for 4 days, then on November 11th, 2024, they convict Richard Allen on 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of murder while kidnapping Abby and Libby. He'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison. So what do you think? Was justice served? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you like getting all the crime in half the time, give this a like and remember to subscribe so you never miss a recap. I'm Chris. Amy and I are here 3 times a week with new stories. Until next time, stay safe out there.